Humanity defeats bioengineered space monster. Soren Vael's fingertips danced across the translucent tactical display, each gesture summoning streams of data that painted the void in probability and death. The Harrier's edge shuddered beneath him, not from weapons fire, not yet, but from the micro-corrections his nav-AI made as it threaded through the debris field at velocities that would have shattered a less experienced pilot's neural link. Contact bearing 270, range 900 clicks. Lieutenant Kari's voice cut through the bridge chatter, flat and professional in that way people sounded when terror had worn grooves into their throats. 900 kilometers, close. Too close. Soren tasted copper. He'd bitten his tongue again, an old racing habit from his days threading the rings of Volta Prime, where milliseconds separated glory from explosive decompression. He centered himself with a breath, studying the sensor ghost that flickered at the edge of their detection envelope like a predator circling wounded prey. All wings maintain formation Delta 7. His words emerged calm, measured. Medical frigates stay tucked behind the escort screen. The Devourer, even thinking the designation made his jaw tighten. Nyxara, the xenobiologists had given her a name, as if nomenclature could domesticate something that consumed entire battle groups and incorporated their weapons into her own biology before the wreckage finished cooling. 3 months ago, Soren had watched his homeworld glass under alien fire while he'd been running supplies in the outer system. Too far to help, close enough to see the atmosphere ignite in shades of amber and violet that still painted his nightmares. He'd sworn then, kneeling in the observation deck of a refugee hauler with 200 other survivors, that he'd never be helpless again. Now he commanded Scout Wing Theta, 18 corvettes, 6 frigates, and the uncomfortable knowledge that between them and the medical convoy squatted 37 irreplaceable doctors, surgeons, and the genetic samples that represented humanity's best hope for combating the plague ravaging the outer colonies. Sir, the contact's accelerating. Kari's fingers blurred across her station. Vector puts her on intercept in 14 minutes. 14 minutes to live or devise something brilliant. The tactical display bloomed with threat projections, crimson tendrils reaching across the black like blood in water. Nyxara moved, and reality bent around her bulk. She wasn't just massive. Mass didn't capture it. 5 kilometers of bioengineered horror, her height a mosaic of consumed technologies and adaptive cellular structures that learned, evolved, remembered. The Vanguard fleet had tried rail guns. She'd absorbed the kinetic impacts and grown armored plates that deflected subsequent rounds like rain on slate. The Europa defense grid had deployed plasma lances hot enough to ignite atmospheres. She'd eaten the energy, metabolized it, then vomited it back as coherent radiation that carved through their flagship's reactor shielding like it was tissue paper. Missiles, nukes, directed energy, kinetic impactors. The graveyard-orbiting Kepler 442b stood testament to conventional warfare's futility against something that treated weapons development like an evolutionary buffet. Wing commanders, sound off. Soren pulled up the formation schematic, watching friendly icons pulse in steady rhythm, each one representing crew who'd entrusted him with their lives. Wing 2 ready. Commander Yasher's voice, gravelly from too many years breathing recycled air. Wing 3 in position. Lieutenant Commander Vex, young enough that the fear hadn't settled into cynicism yet. Wing 4 standing by. Captain Roche steady as always. Soren's display flickered. Nyxara had dropped her stealth envelope, a theatrical flourish from something intelligent enough to understand psychological warfare. The sensor returns painted her in nauseating detail. Bioluminescent nodes pulsing along her flanks, tentacle analogs that writhed with independent purpose, and that maw a circular aperture ringed with what looked disturbingly like repurposed human titanium plating, probably from the indomitable hull after she'd consumed Admiral Garrett's flagship 3 weeks prior. She's hailing us, Kari's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. Audio only. Put it through. Static washed the bridge, then resolved into something worse. A voice that sounded almost human, modulated from dozens of consumed crew vocal cords stitched into some nightmare synthesis. Small things, fragile things. The words slithered through the speakers. You flee, always flee, your metals taste of fear. Soren muted his end of the channel. Tactical, start feeding me real-time movement analytics. I want predictive algorithms on her maneuvering thrusters, assuming she has thrusters, and not some eldritch nonsense. On it, sir. Ensign Markova's hands flew across her console. He unmuted. This is Commander Vael of the Terran Scout Fleet. You're in violation of. Violations. Nyxara's laugh scraped like ceramic on bone. Your species builds such elaborate structures of meaning, rules, laws, morality. All of it dissolves in my acids. All of it becomes nourishment. 800 kilometers. She was closing faster now, shedding velocity in ways that violated Newtonian mechanics, biomass pulsing, reshaping, probably metabolizing her own tissues to generate thrust without reaction mass. Sir, she's deploying. I don't even know what to call them. Subsidiary organisms. Kari highlighted dozens of smaller contacts peeling away from Nyxara's bulk. Soren's mind raced. In the zero-G racing circuit, he'd made his reputation reading opponent patterns, anticipating maneuvers before conscious decision translated to action. Every pilot had tells, the microcorrections before a hard burn, the deceleration signature that preceded a vector change. He'd won 17 consecutive races by mapping those patterns, building predictive models in his head that let him occupy the space his opponents intended to claim before they arrived. Could a creature, even one this intelligent, hide every tell? Launch microdrones. The order crystallized as he spoke it. I want full-spectrum analysis. Every wavelength, every particle emission, gravitational microvariations, everything. Sir, that's a waste of it. Kari caught his look and nodded. Launching now. The Harrier's edge shivered as 100 pinprick drones scattered into the black, their sensor packages worth more than most planetary defense budgets. They'd never recover them, but intelligence had value that transcended cost accounting. All wings, prepare evasive pattern Vael 7 on my mark. He pulled up the formation schematic he designed 3 sleepless nights ago, back when this had been theoretical. We're going to give her what she expects. Which is, Yashir's voice carried skepticism. A fight she can win. The subsidiary organisms resolved on sensors, each one roughly Corvette-sized, covered in the same adaptive hide as their progenitor. They moved with disturbing coordination, clearly slave to Nyxara's distributed intelligence. 700 kilometers. Soren's display began populating with drone telemetry. Thermal blooms here, electromagnetic fluctuations there, minute gravitational eddies that suggested mass redistribution within Nyxara's bulk. The AI started building predictive models, but something felt wrong, too much data, too much noise. Then he saw it, a pattern in the chaos. Every time Nyxara adjusted her vector, a cascade of bioluminescent pulses rippled along her port side exactly 2.3 seconds before the actual maneuver. The thermal signature in her secondary heat vents spiked 0.7 seconds before she deployed subsidiary organisms. She wasn't just a predator. She was a learned predator, executing behaviors that had proven successful against previous prey. And learned behaviors created patterns, exploitable patterns. Kari, pull up the engagement reports from the Vanguard massacre. Soren's fingers flew across his command console. I need timestamps on when they deployed countermeasures versus when Nyxara responded. Pulling them now. 600 kilometers. The subsidiary organism spread into an envelopment formation, cutting off retreat vectors with mechanical precision. The reports scrolled past desperate transmissions from dying ships, but there, buried in the chaos. The Vanguard had launched missiles at T-47 seconds. Nyxara had begun growing point defense nodules at T-49 seconds. Before the missiles launched, she'd predicted their response based on prior encounters. She was brilliant, adaptive, terrifying. But she was fighting the last war. Listen carefully. Soren switched to the command-level encrypted channel. We're not here to win with weapons. We're here to make her think she's winning with weapons. 500 kilometers. All wings activate laser batteries. Full-spectrum visible light. I want her to see this. The order felt insane even as he gave it. Target her primary sensory clusters. Fire. 18 corvettes opened up simultaneously. Coherent light lanced across the void, painting Nyxara's forward section in emerald and ruby and sapphire. The beams splashed across her hide, absorbed, dissipated, useless, exactly as expected. But her response was immediate. The bioluminescent nodes along her flanks flared brilliant white, and sections of her hide began restructuring, thickening, refracting, adapting to diffuse laser energy even more efficiently. She was allocating biological resources to counter a threat she'd already neutralized. Keep firing, don't let up. Soren watched the thermal data streaming from his drones. Nyxara's core temperature was climbing barely but measurably. Markova analysis. She's metabolizing faster, sir. Burning internal resources to fuel the adaptation. How much faster? 7% above baseline. 8, 9. There it was, the flaw in perfection. Nyxara had evolved to consume and adapt, to metabolize threats into fuel for her endless growth. But adaptation required energy, and even bioengineered horrors obeyed thermodynamics. Every defense she erected, every countermeasure she grew, depleted her internal reserves. 400 kilometers. Cease fire. All wings launch decoy drones. Soren pulled up the convoy manifest, scrolling through cargo manifests until he found what he needed. Medical frigates, I need access to your biological storage. Commander, those samples are. The convoy leader's protest died as Soren cut him off. How many colony worlds die if this thing reaches the inner systems? Silence. Transfer authorization to my console, now. 300 kilometers. The subsidiary organisms were close enough that Soren could make out individual details, clusters of what looked like compound eyes, manipulator appendages that terminated in disturbingly articulated digits. Each one a masterwork of hostile biology. His console chirped, access granted. The medical frigates carried genetic material for treating the bacterial plague ravaging Tau Ceti. Synthesized antibodies, engineered phages, concentrated enzyme solutions. Biological agents designed to target and disrupt cellular processes. And Nyxara consumed biology. Load the decoy drones with the following compounds. Soren rattled off chemical designations, watching the cargo handlers' faces pale as they realized what he was ordering. Maximum dispersal pattern. Make them look like escape pods, panicked crew abandoning ship. Sir, those treatments are irreplaceable. So are human lives, load them. 200 kilometers. The tactical display showed his wings scattering into the evasive pattern. He designed chaotic, desperate, exactly what Nyxara would expect from prey. The decoy drones launched amid the confusion, their thermal signatures masked as emergency life support systems, their trajectories tumbling and erratic like vessels fleeing a massacre. Nyxara's response was swift. The subsidiary organisms converged on the escape pods, tentacles extending to capture and draw them toward the central maw. She'd learned that human vessels often contained survivors, soft biomass richer in useful proteins than the metallic hulls. Detonation on my mark. Soren watched the drones disappear into bioluminescent gullets. Not yet. Let her start metabolizing. The seconds crawled. On the display, Nyxara's thermal signature began to shift, subtle changes, as her digestive analogs broke down the captured material, flooding her system with what she interpreted as high-value nutrition. Concentrated antibacterial agents, bacteriophages engineered to hijack cellular replication, enzyme cocktails designed to disrupt metabolic pathways. Inside a human, they'd cure the plague. Inside a bioengineered leviathan built from stolen genetics and forced adaptation. Now, Soren's voice cut like a blade. The remaining drone canisters ruptured, dispersing their payload in a cloud of aerosolized biology. Nyxara's absorption reflex was automatic, her hide's porous nature designed to maximize intake of useful materials. She inhaled the cloud like atmosphere, pulling it deep into her distributed organ systems. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then her bioluminescence stuttered. Thermal spike, Markova's voice cracked with excitement. Her core temp is climbing 15% 2025. On the display, Nyxara's previously fluid movements became spastic. The adaptive hide along her flanks began rippling with uncontrolled cellular growth, her own biology turning against itself as the phages hijacked her replication mechanisms. The antibodies designed to flag bacterial cells for immune destruction instead marked her own tissues, triggering catastrophic autoimmune responses in her distributed organ clusters. She was trying to adapt. Soren could see it in the frantic way sections of her hide slewed off, attempting to isolate infected tissues. But the compounds were already systemic, carried through whatever passed for her circulatory system. Every cell she metabolized spread the contamination further. What have you? Nyxara's synthesized voice degraded into static and sounds that might have been pain. I adapt. I consume. I am. You're predictable. Soren kept his voice level. You adapted so well to every weapon we threw at you that you stopped questioning what you were consuming. The Leviathan writhed. Her subsidiary organisms lost coordination, tumbling away like puppets with severed strings. Sections of her hide crystallized, then shattered as cellular processes spiraled into chaos. She'd built herself from consumed genetics human, Crotian, Velathi, a dozen species, but she'd never developed immune recognition protocols. She'd never needed them when everything she encountered was food. 100 kilometers. All wings, target her central neural cluster coordinates uploading now. Soren highlighted the region where his drones had detected the highest concentration of coordinated bioelectrical activity. Railguns, maximum yield. The response was instantaneous. Magnetic accelerators hummed to life across the fleet, and depleted uranium slugs carved through the void at relativistic velocities. They struck Nyxara's convulsing bulk like the fist of an angry god. But this time she couldn't adapt. Her metabolism was consuming itself in cascading failure. Every adaptation mechanism now a liability as engineered phages turned her own biological sophistication into a weapon against her. The railgun impacts punched through compromised tissues that would have deflected the same weapons hours before, coring deep into the neural cluster that housed her terrible intelligence. Nyxara the Devourer, the nightmare that had consumed the Vanguard fleet, that had forced humanity into desperate retreat across a dozen systems, screamed. The sound transmitted through her bioelectrical field, a subsonic wail that made Soren's teeth ache even filtered through the ship's sensors. Then silence. Her bioluminescence guttered and died. The massive bulk that had dominated the tactical display began tumbling, inertia the only force governing her trajectory now. The subsidiary organisms drifted like dead leaves, their connection to the maternal intelligence severed. Confirm the kill. Soren's hands were shaking, he noticed with distant surprise. I want active scans. If there's so much as a cell with independent function, I need to know. The minutes stretched while sensors probed the corpse. The bridge was silent except for the hum of electronics and the measured breathing of people who just survived the unsurvivable. "No activity, sir." Kari's voice was barely a whisper. She's gone." The confirmation should have brought relief. Instead, Soren felt hollow. He thought about the medical supplies he'd weaponized, treatments that might have saved thousands now drifting in a dead monster's gut. He thought about his homeworld, about the vow he'd made kneeling in a refugee hauler. He'd kept that vow, but the mathematics of survival were written in sacrifices he'd spend years trying to justify. Communications open a broadband transmission, all human frequencies. Soren straightened in his command chair, forcing steel into his spine. "This is Scout Wing Theta. The entity designated Nyxara has been neutralized. Threat assessment eliminated." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The colonies needed more than victory. They needed hope that humanity could survive this war against things that made Nyxara look like a preliminary sketch. Engagement analysis. The enemy adapted to our weapons but failed to adapt to our thinking. We countered superior firepower with superior strategy, leveraging biological agents in unconventional application. This victory demonstrates that raw predatory power can be eclipsed through strategic patience and tactical innovation. The words felt rehearsed even as he spoke them, but they were necessary. Somewhere in the outer colonies, people were listening to this transmission, weighing whether to keep fighting or to flee into the deep black and hope the war didn't follow. Additional tactical data is being compiled and will be distributed fleet-wide. Scout Wing Theta resuming patrol duties. Vael out. He closed the channel and allowed himself to slump slightly in his chair. "Sir," Kari's voice was tentative. "Are you all right?" Soren looked at the tactical display, at Nyxara's corpse tumbling through the void, at the ships of his wing still pulsing with life and crew who'd see another day. He thought about the medical supplies sacrificed, about the plague still ravaging colony worlds, about the next horror that would inevitably emerge from the outer rims, because the universe seemed determined to test whether humanity's stubborn refusal to die was philosophical conviction or evolutionary accident. "No," he admitted, "but we won, and that has to be enough." The Harrier's Edge began its post-combat systems check, already transitioning back to the routine of survival. Behind them, Nyxara's corpse drifted, a monument to adaptation's limits and humanity's capacity for weaponizing anything, even their own medicine. In the medical frigate, doctors stared at empty storage compartments and recalculated how many patients would die for lack of treatment. In the outer colonies, refugee families gathered around receivers to hear that one nightmare had ended, and wondered about the nightmare still unnamed, still approaching. And in the command chair of a scout corvette, Soren Vael began composing his after-action report, translating survival into bullet points and tactical recommendations, reducing horror to clinical language that wouldn't keep the analysts awake at night. He made it 3 paragraphs before his hands started shaking again. Kari, without a word, brought him coffee, real coffee, smuggled from Earth at prices that could have bought orbital real estate. She set it on his console and returned to her station, giving him the privacy to pretend the steam in his eyes came from the beverage's heat and not from the knowledge that he'd become exactly what survival demanded. Someone who could weaponize medicine, who could sacrifice thousands to save millions, who could make those calculations and still sleep at night. Or try to, anyway. The coffee was black and bitter. He drank it anyway. Outside the viewports, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of organic intelligence struggling to persist in the gaps between their light. Humanity had carved out a precarious foothold in this cosmos, defended it with ingenuity and desperation in roughly equal measure. Soren finished his coffee and returned to his report. There'd be other battles, other nightmares. The war wasn't won, just this engagement, just this enemy. But they'd proven something important today. Humanity didn't have to be the strongest or the most adaptable. They just had to be unpredictable enough that the universe couldn't quite figure out how to kill them all. He allowed himself a thin smile. His homeworld was gone, glassed to cinders, but he was still here, still fighting. And somewhere in the outer colonies, families he'd never meet were alive because he'd chosen to be clever instead of strong. The mathematics of survival didn't balance. They never would. But they added up to one more day, one more fight, one more chance to prove that humanity's most dangerous adaptation wasn't physical or technological. It was sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept extinction as inevitable. "Set course for the rendezvous point," Soren ordered, his voice steady now. "And someone start cataloging samples from Nyxara's corpse. We're going to learn everything that thing knew, then figure out how to kill the next one faster." The bridge crew responded with practiced efficiency, already moving forward because that's what survivors did. They moved forward or they died. Soren Vael chose forward. Again, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more journeys. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next adventure.